My name is Owen Tanner, and over the past year, I've been working on a documentary on a person known as Cowboy. Uh, Cowboy and I met through my hometown of Encampment, Wyoming, which only has a population of about 450 to 500 people. And when I first met him, I never thought much of him. He fit in the local stereotype for older people, and I never really looked into him very much for many years. And then once I started taking the time to get to know him, I started to realize that he was a pretty remarkable person. I, I kind of come to a saying of saying that Cowboy had a special way of talking to you that made you feel like the most important person in the world at that very moment. He made you feel important. He loved to listen to people. He loved getting to speak to people. And so over time, I kind of got to know him. Just kind of his general personality, nothing really about him, though. And then I started kind of getting in conversations about him with other people. And I started hearing these absolutely insane things about him, that of these extraordinary things that he's done. And it made me really curious. One of the fact that intrigued me the most and that triggered me to want to make this documentary is that someone just kind of mentioned that he had nearly a PhD in psychology, and that he had never worked in a psychology-based field, that he just had a ton of education on the subject, and here he was just being this cowboy out in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, in a town that virtually no one knows about. It's weird. Or that's what I thought so. So one day I came up to Cowboy and I just asked, "Can I do a documentary about you?" And he looked at me and was kind of confused, as I feel like most people would be if some random kid just walked up to you and be like, "Hey, would you be interested in doing this thing?" And that happened in the December of 2023. And he said, I'll think about it. A couple weeks later, he came up to me and he just looked at me and just said, "I'll do it." Turned around and walked away. So I started to work on that. By January 8th, 2024, that's when I had my interview with him. And the format of this documentary is going to be kind of going through a rough chronological order of his life, but also kind of in the order of the way I learned about him. And that'll be more clear later. But you will get to know Cowboy. You'll get to know his life. You'll get to hear his stories. And they're extraordinary. They had my jaw on the ground so many times. And I'm very happy that you, the viewer, are going to be able to hear his stories so that way they can be immortalized as they should be. Because this man has lived a life like another. So, without further ado, I'll let you hear from him himself. To start out, we're going to cover some of long-haul trucking that he did during his time in high school.
I got my CDL, well, during World War II, when there was hardly anybody to work. At that time they called it a professional chauffeur's license, long before the CDL, because this was 1943 or something. And I had just turned old enough to be available for 16, I guess. And I immediately applied and tested and, yep, got a license. And then I kept it for quite a few years driving all kinds of equipment and going all kinds of places. Charters, a lot of it. That was fun. Somebody needs something, and okay, here we go. How do you get there? Well, start looking. And then later on, of course, it became a CDL and hours of service and stuff. It was an experience because some of the guys took a little liberty with things. Well, at that time, you didn't have a universal driver's license. What you had was a driver's license for your state. But because they didn't have a universal license, you could say you're going through Idaho. Okay, I might want to come back here again. And you could just go into a motel practically and, well, I need a driver's license. Okay, fine. You'd sign, yep, you have a driver's license. You carry it in your logbook. Okay, I got one for Utah and Ohio and Pennsylvania. Just pull out the right one for the highway you're going to drive on. Not anymore. And of course you had to keep a logbook, and that was a process of paper shuffling to be sure you had the driver's license to match your logbook, to match your time schedule. Mm-hmm. Can't do that now, and that's a blessing. It makes it much safer. But in that respect, driving, as I said, I used to come across from Cheyenne to Laramie to Rollins on old US 30 or 287, a lot of it, same highway. And there were towns every 7 miles. And usually in each one of those towns there was a restaurant and a place where you could get some work done on your car. Not now. Then when the bright-eyed stupidity boys from the government decided that we needed an interstate, and people in Wyoming begged them not, you can't build over that area. Oh, well, we can keep it open. No, you can't. Now you can't find the dadgum highway because it's so much superstructure covering up snow fences, and then it's still shut down about as much as it's open. But they were too smart. So many people got their lives lost and froze to death. Oh, but we can keep it open. No, I'll see you where there's no sunshine. But that used to be a nice, and that one section of a 4-lane highway over by Rock River, they built that because, talk about smart, they figured out with all the stop and go traffic you'd have to put in to maintain the highway, working on it, it was cheaper to build a new section and let the old section go, and then shut the old section off and repair it and to everybody over the new one. Then you didn't have to have stop and go and flagmen all the time. And they worked on it 24 hours a day. And that would have been 51. But boy, they got it done in a hurry, and now it's a nice 4-lane highway over there around Rock River. Too bad they didn't have some more smart boys like that in the highway department instead of the ones they had on US 80, which they call the Snow Chi Min Trail, not Ho Chi Minh, Snow Chi Min. Check and see whether it's open today or not.
Now that we've heard about Cowboy's trucking days during high school, it's time to mention that in 1945, his senior year of high school, he enlisted into the United States Navy. Of course, 1945 is the last year of World War II. And as he'll explain in the rest of the interview to come, he would have been a pilot, and then the war ended, and he got transferred into more peacetime roles. But why should I sit here and explain that to you when he can himself?
I was based at Lakehurst, New Jersey, which is where, if you knew your history, was where the Hindenburg dirigible, not a balloon or not a blimp, blew up. and it was because they were using hydrogen instead of helium, and when they connected to the ground post, it exploded. And then if you go around the United States, Dayton, Ohio, and there's one south of, oh goodness gracious, what would that be? That'd be down almost in Georgia. Dirigible bases, and I mean big. For instance, at Lakehurst, where the Hindenburg was, it took railroad cars to move the doors, and you could put a destroyer, a couple of destroyers, and something else in them. They're that big. And I had got, one day I was up wandering around for some reason. The guy come by. Well, I know I was doing some photographic work, and he said, "You got time to do a couple of prints?" Sure. This was Encyclopedia Britannica. You probably never heard of it, but there was a period in time when encyclopedias were big, and there were 4 or 5 World Book and on, and they would go around and sell them. But they were not just one volume, there were several volumes. Okay, why? What do you got? And he says, well, I've got a deal that Britannica wants some pictures of Lakehurst, New Jersey, and the blimps and the dirigibles. Okay, I printed them off, so I got credit for that. That was probably one of the highlights of my careers.
Right.
But we did, in that same vein, went from dirigibles to blimps, and that was what we were doing at Lakehurst, New Jersey, and I was with the crew that put the first advertising blimps into existence, like what's the blimp that flies around town? Goodyear. Right. Well, the first 2 were Ford Motor Company and MGM, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Movies. And boy, when we got those all rigged up and got to watch them fly over Philadelphia and Newark, New Jersey, oh, what a sight that was. Elizabeth Scott dedicated one of them, and I don't remember. Some other famous movie actress dedicated the other one. But it was sure a treat to get to see them fly, and all the flashing lights and stuff on them. And so many things were just, well, as a matter of fact, one of the exciting things while I was based there at Lakehurst, we got one of the first helicopter squadrons. Who the heck ever heard of a helicopter? This was back in 41 or 2 or something, when it was just a rotator and a tail blade. Well, if you ever heard, there was an aircraft called an autogyro, which was a forerunner of a helicopter, because it had one big fan on top and a little forward motor, and that controlled all your aerodynamics. And then that one we got there at Lakehurst, New Jersey, was a squadron of about 10, I guess. And something happened. It got out of sync and it blew the rotor and crashed right in front of us. Thought, okay, that's not a good idea. But among other things we had there was parachute rigger school, where you had to pack. You started out with raw materials and you made a parachute, had to pack it, and then to be sure it was done right, you had to jump it. Okay, well, I had a couple of buddies, and they'd done this shoot, and the instructor was with them. Well, the one guy's family had a severe occurrence, and he had to take off, and they gave him leave to go back to see his family. I think his father was dying or something. So the instructor was going to jump his chute, and my buddy was going to jump the instructor's chute. Well, if you ever watched the jumps, They come out and just peel them off. Okay, except the instructor chute doesn't open. And finally, about 200 feet, it popped, the emergency chute. He hit hard. It didn't kill him and it didn't break anything, but he hit hard. We took that chute back to the loft. You could not pull it apart. It had so much static electricity you couldn't physically pull the thing apart. No wonder he had to use his emergency.
It's me again. I'm here to pop in to interject a piece of information that the Navy was paying for him to go to college, which you'll hear about here in a moment. It just is good to keep in mind that he is doing his naval work that he just got done explaining. At the same time, he was going to college and doing some other stuff that he is also about to describe.
Worked in Oregon in the lumber industry, and what else? Oh, also construction, all kinds of construction, and got a job in Iowa where we worked the two of us worked. One worked from midnight till 8, and the other worked from 8 till midnight. 13 days a week, and you got 1 day off. And high pay, I think it was 35 cents an hour. So that's how life went. And then all the same time I'm going to college. I'd started college in the Navy with the balloons, and then continued with the Navy in Upper Iowa University, then Iowa State College in Ames, Iowa, and then Santa Ana College and the University of Denver, and graduated, did all my graduate work at the University of Denver. Bachelor's, master's, and would-be PhD. And then all this time I was working usually some form of construction and building houses and condos and roofing houses and whatever it took to do the job. And then I worked for agriculture community. We used to fill grain barrels with grain, and then they'd ship it out and sell it to the farmers or wherever it was needed.
Now that we've heard about Cowboy's time in the military and his time in college, it's time to move into some of the jobs that he's done, which is quite the variety. He has done a lot of work in his life, and a lot of the jobs that he's done is part of what makes his life so extraordinary.
All kinds of jobs. I was in Denver when railroads were still big. This was the 52, and I was a dispatcher for trains going out of the city of Denver to various parts of the state, and that was all railroad cars. That was interesting. Got to meet a lot of people, and just kept on going from there. And finished up DU, then got a teacher's credential. I taught school for 6 or 7 years. At the same time, I was building houses and whatever there was to do. It was kind of ho-hum, and then, and then I got involved in skiing again up at Mammoth, and ended up owning a bar and a restaurant and more construction up in Mammoth Mountain, California. And it was just continued a while. Then I sold my bar in Mammoth, which was on several TV shows, and in the meantime I got into something, somehow or another I got lined up with Academy of Country Music, and we put on the live 3-hour TV show every spring in Los Angeles area, and I was on the board of directors for that for about 10 years until I ended up with a project in Hawaii, and I said, I'm not flying back and forth just to go to the meetings, so I did a project in Hawaii I didn't want to do. Nope, want to go to Hawaii? Yep. Well, you don't have to stay long. 90 days and the winter crown will come in. Okay, fine. 90 days turned into 5 years. And I enjoyed it. It was fun, but met an awful lot of people. Got to be right where the volcano was flowing, watching the lava go by. Interesting.
As previously mentioned, Cowboy did some work with the Academy of Country Music, which is an extremely fascinating part of his careers. And the next bit is all about more detail of what he did in association with them.
Academy of Country Music, I got into a close relationship with about everybody that was in country and western music, like Charlie Pride and all the Alabama group and all those guys, and it was fun. And Charlie and I one night were playing around just for grins, and I was auditioning some of the groups that were going to perform, and we had two guitars that we auctioned off. One we kept for a souvenir, and the other one we sold then for Christmas. And we were playing some country western music, and came up. I said, "Well, Strawberry Roan's one of the famous names on that record." Okay, well, let's play it. Okay, fine. And he strums and he strums. How's it go? Well, any other day I could have threaded Strawberry Roan front, side, or both directions at the same time, but when Charlie Pride's looking at you, waiting for you to come up with this song words, I finally got it out, and we managed to get through it. And when it was over, he says, "Next time we sing Strawberry Roan, let's be sure we know all the words." Okay, fine, Charlie, it's your fault, not mine. But Tex Williams and all those guys were fun. The lady that used to always wear a hat with a price tag on it, Minnie Pearl. She and I had a lot of fun. We'd tease each other about, I'd buy a hat and deliberately leave the price tag on it. So, no, I'm talking like Minnie Pearl.
It is worth mentioning that during Cowboy's time with the Academy of Country Music, he also taught at several different California schools as his primary job. Now, to shift gears into his previously mentioned time at Mammoth Mountain, in which he owned a bar.
But skied with all kinds of big names in the film industry. They came to Mammoth like a good thing. John Wayne, and John Wayne didn't ski, but we did a couple of movies with his troops at Hot Springs down there. And then James L.E.N.S, Miss Kitty, knew all of them. And James L.E.N.S is about 6'9". There's a couple of guys from, I can't remember, country music movies skied with. But that just was the place to be if you were a skier. Well, the slogan was, "Go where you know there's snow." And you talk about snow here, no, that ain't nothing. Mammoth Mountain, 6 feet of snow overnight, no big deal. Mm-hmm. Okay, one of those bumps is my car, but I don't know which one. I'll shovel till I figure it out. 3 feet of snow now, don't even put chains on.
Also, during Cowboy's time at Mammoth Mountain, he was a ski instructor, and he wasn't just a ski instructor at Mammoth Mountain. He was also a ski instructor during his time at the University of Denver on behalf of the military. And now he does have a couple stories that he shared with me and vicariously with you through the interview about his time ski instructing.
Because you get all ages and all capabilities. One time I was working with a group on a ski class, and I kept looking at one guy. It's, you know you got your boots on the wrong foot? Oh no, you know. Never had spare ski boots on, but he had one on the wrong foot. I thought that would have hurt like a good thing, but well, if it did, it didn't bother him enough that he figured there was anything wrong. Well, I got him out of that and we put him in the right boots, and it was a little better.
Now, after Cowboy's time at Mammoth Mountain, he actually got requested to go to Hawaii, which was an interesting time that he will explain more about now.
And I was on the Big Island, and the lava started to flow in 1980, this last one. And, well, I say the one that's been going the longest, the unrecorded history. And I got in substantially with big guns in the scientific department of HVO, Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And they liked me and a friend of mine, and okay, tell Cowboy to be here first thing in the morning. I get on my car and run down there about 60 miles, and they'd have a seat on a chopper, and away we'd go over the latest lava flows, and boy, stuff you see. Some of it never, well, it was all photographed, but some of it never shown publicly. And it was, that's a whole different ball game to watch lava flow. You think, no, that's not right. Rock is rock. No, not when it's 3,500 degrees. It's fluid. It's like toothpaste. Okay, and it may be even thinner than that. It may just flow like water. But it's sure an experience to see.
After Cowboy's time in Hawaii, he got invited to go work for Talladega Racetrack, or the Talladega 500, as he will explain more about now.
And then, then after that, I got involved in I was going to go to Las Vegas, and I did a project there for about 3 years. Ran into a guy and said, well, why don't you, they're looking for help at Talladega Racetrack in Alabama. Well, good, where the hell is that? So I called and said, well, come on down. Said, we just had a guy from Wyoming. I said, yes, he just got here, and he turned out the lights, so I'm coming down to Alabama. And I did that for racetrack 25 years in the spring and 25 years in the fall.
Now, during Cowboy's time at Talladega, when he retired, Talladega actually created a pamphlet and a story to honor the years that he had spent there, which he will now tell a story about.
First, they came out with that in the spring, but it didn't have any pictures. And one of the ladies I worked with, Paige Gaither, said, did you see your book? I said, what are you talking about? She says, well, they don't, what book? What are you talking about? So she finally found it. No, I hadn't seen it. Then that fall, they came out with it in print. Oh my. I was here in town, or I wasn't here in town, I was down there in Talladega, and I hadn't seen the book yet. And somebody here at the senior center called and said, did you see Cowboy's pictures in the Talladega paper? What in the world are you talking about? Well, they'd seen it before I did down there in Talladega. Strange occurrences. But that was fun. I had a lot of good memories from the people I knew from the race.
Now, during all that was previously mentioned, Cowboy also had the opportunity to do a lot of world travel. He met a lot of people, made a lot of connections that allowed him to do so, and had a lot of amazing experiences internationally.
So I was doing a project in someplace in L.A., and I don't remember, a construction project. Turned out the guy that I was doing the project for owned property in Israel, and he asked me to would I go take a look at it and tell him what ought to be done, and I did, and then I got acquainted with several people there, and went over with 2 or 3 groups and surveyed and sightseed, all that kind of thing. And I've been to Israel, I don't know, half a dozen times maybe. All over from clear up on the top end where they have a ski area to down into the Dead Sea. Quite a country. Some of the best lattes I've ever had was down there in the middle of the Israeli desert. But goodness gracious, they tell you do not go into the Dead Sea. Swimming. Well, you always get some people that are too smart to pay attention. And boy, you get that stuff in your eyes and you'll scream and holler for pain. And then you got to go get somebody to help you while you get your eyes washed out. So don't do that. And I was all over. I had about 4 good buddies that were native Israelis. And boy, they take me places where nobody else could get in because they were roped off. Phenomenal country. And I met a bunch of guys in cowboy hat. You kind of stand out in the crowd in a cowboy hat in Africa. And they invited me, and they had camels. Well, that was right at the big pyramid. And, well, I never rode a camel. Okay, fine. Now that is an experience, because camels are laying down when you get on. And I was riding a drum. No, I was riding a back three, a 1-hump. The dromedary is a 2-hump camel. Okay, get on here. Okay, fine. And they go, looking, well, watch this cowboy get on a camel. Good Lord, you think, are you ever going to quit standing up? By the time they get up full height, you're up about 13 feet, and you think you need oxygen. It's a different, and then they're a pacing animal. So both feet on one side move at the same time. They don't cross like a gallop does. And that's another thing to get used to. But the way, and their hoofs are cushioned. It's a real soft ride, but boy, that's a different feeling.
Now, during Cowboy's time with Talladega, at some point he ended up in an encampment where he started integrating himself into the community and kind of fell in love with the area being known as the Valley. And he'll kind of use that as a term later, and it's a very local term. And he'll start out by talking about his time with the Encampment Visitors Center, which he spent many years with them from, as you're about to hear.
I've been there 20 some years, I guess. And that's fun because, again, how did you find, most of you couldn't find Wyoming on the map, and I'm getting people from Greece and Africa and Chile, and okay, there it is. And what a treat to get to talk to all those people from all over the world. We run that from, usually about second week in May until about second week in October. And it's a real eye-opener and a real enjoyable experience. And get to promote the area, that's another thing. tell them, okay. And it's so funny because particularly Germans, when they come in, they have done their research. And I'll get them, okay, we thought we'd go to this way, and ain't no roads out there. I've driven, oh, yes, there is, just like they said. Well, how did I ever miss that deer trail that you're going to drive on? Well, because they did the research. But boy, some of the roads I've learned about through them that I thought I knew all about, and no, I didn't know all about. Had my mouth running, my brain shut off. But that is a fun enterprise, the visitor center. I tell you, the valley is a phenomenal place. We're lucky to live here. It is a joy and a privilege because you see so much terrain, just geographical terrain, physical terrain, mountains, and so many pretty mountains, so much scenery on the mountains, and then if you drive up 70 highway when the colors are changing, you just can't describe it. And this last year was just superb. Places that they just jump out of the window at you, so to speak, and my Godfrey, is that pretty, and it's gold and it's red. Now what we do not have is the hardwoods like you have in, say, South Carolina, North Carolina, where you have more reds. But boy, when we get our colors in Aspen Alley, you ought to have to pay high rent to get to go up there. And it's good, but it's not as good as it used to be because they've not cared for it. And the aspens are a short-lived and blight subjected tree. They die and they fall over and they're not cleaning them out. So now it's kind of a guessing game whether you're going to be able to get through, but boy, it's sure pretty. And that's pretty. And then if you drive over Crescent Junction down 789 to Colorado, that's a gorgeous drive. And of course, when the oil boom was going the last time, there were 2 or 3 settlements down in there where it had 200 people in each one. And good terrain. And well, any way you go, so to speak, out of Rollins or out of Encampment, north, south, east, or west has got just gorgeous scenery. It doesn't matter which way you want to do it. And all of the side roads you can see, goodness gracious, and little lakes, and oh my, we're blessed. We're really blessed. And I had to laugh. We used to have, this was before they built Walmart in Rollins. And I'd have people come into the visitor center. They, oh, it's pretty. And they ooh la la around about it. Yes, it is. Well, we'd like to find a place alongside a river and build a house. Well, if there's any place to sell, I'd have already bought it. But that's beside the point. And then the next thing, and how far is the nearest Walmart? 90 miles and too damn close. Boom, and they're gone. Not anymore. Now they come to Rollins anyhow. But until we had Rollins or Walmart, they couldn't wait to get out of town. Now we have what we used to have in California in 1940s. People coming out of California into Oregon. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's great. Yep. And I hope you enjoy it and be damn sure you go home. Well, now they're coming in from Colorado. Oh, wow, Wyoming. Oh, yeah. Be damn sure you go back to Colorado. And don't take Colorado with you over to here.
Now that you've heard a great deal of Cowboy's life, his jobs, his journeys, all the things that he's seen, the people that he's met, he's absolutely extraordinary. And I'm sure that's evident as you're watching this. But a question that we haven't really answered at this point is, how did we come to be known as Cowboy?
it's kind of about a 3-chapter situation. I got called that way back when little, because we used to play cowboy and Indians a lot, you know, when you were just little kids. And then Western, we used to have 2 movie houses, and one of them always ran Western movies, you know. Well, no, you wouldn't know because it was way before your time, but Buck Jones and Ken Maynard and some of those guys. So we'd go to that, and I think those movies cost you a dime, big dime. And I got that, and then I was doing a big project, in Hawaii, I guess, where it started. And I had a hard hat that was shaped just like this hat. Well, okay, then that's where Cowboy started. And then I did a big project at A Basin, I guess it was. Big construction project. And I wore that cowboy hard hat. And the chief inspector, 2 or 3 times, no, that's not legal. Yes, it is legal. I've got all the paperwork, and I'd show it. Okay, about the 3rd time he accepted the fact, but they always, that's where Cowboy really took off. But I still got that hat, but I can't find the band for it anymore to wear it. But it was just illegal, just like any other Western construction hard hat, but it was shaped like a cowboy hat. And that's where it really stuck. And that's been 30 years ago.
Now, someone else who I got to speak to during the documentary process was Cowboy's daughter, Nancy.
So I'm Nancy Wadsworth, Dr. Nancy Dawn Wadsworth, and I am a professor of political science at the University of Denver, which totally coincidentally, my father got his master's degree from the same school. And I am a writer and a scholar and a researcher and a teacher, and that's what I do for a living.
Nancy, of course, knows a lot about her dad, and she shared some stories with me about him, other details about his life, kind of fill in some other gaps that he did not mention with me during Cowboy and I's interview.
And in addition to doing a lot of things vocationally and professionally, like he really has done a lot, including cowboying, working on ranches when he was in his 20s. He's worked for all kinds of businesses, government agencies for a little while, and now he works for the Carbon County Tourism Center, the Visitor Center, and he's also worked for the local museum. But he loves knowledge. He loves, I think, understanding how worlds work, like the world of skiing, the world of business, the world of tourism in Wyoming, and he will dedicate himself to anything that he can be helpful, that he can serve toward. He has always been passionate about the rodeo and sort of the ideal of the ranch lifestyle, the cowboy lifestyle. And we went to rodeo, we went to Cheyenne Frontier Days every year from the time I was 6 years old, and my brother went a year earlier, until just a few years ago. I finally decided to stop going, but I've been with him a zillion times, and I think he's into close to 50 times that he's been to the rodeo. And he's always loved driving around the world, but driving all over the United States back and forth for a long time. He's had cars he's put millions of miles on, and he loves God. He loves his relationship to God. He's a student of the Bible, of biblical hermeneutics. You can always see him reading. If he's reading something, it's most of the time going to be religious literature. And he, as you may have noticed, he's very charismatic and he connects well with people. And it's funny because living in Encampment, he's very much like, he has a mayor of the town vibe almost. Everyone knows him and he knows everyone, and he's interested in everything going on. But I actually thought of him as kind of a loner and a not misanthrope, but kind of a world wanderer for a lot of my life, from between when I was 20 and maybe 40 or so. He was on the road a lot for jobs, and he would move from place to place for a while when my brother and I were in college. And I thought of him as kind of a loner, so it surprised me when he found it. He found a town and found a place in a community, and now I see him as someone who's really embedded in community. And that's probably his deepest gift, is his willingness to serve, his willingness to get to know people, and his interest in people. Yeah, kind of no matter what.
At this point, we've heard a lot about Cowboy, about the amazing people that he's gotten to know, the amazing things that he's done. It's all purely legendary. There's no two ways about it. Cowboy is a legend, but behind every legend is a man. And the man in this case is Billy Ogden Wadsworth, which is his full name. Bill, just like you and me, is a person, somebody who had a childhood, who has a family, who's made mistakes, who has opinions and beliefs. And in my initial interview with Cowboy, I was so star-strucken by his experiences that I completely overlooked the man. In the interview that I did do with him, he spoke about his childhood. He spoke about his family. I asked about that. But I didn't get much more from him. What that ended up coming from was Nancy. Nancy ended up filling in a lot of those gaps. And in the second act, you will hear a lot about Nancy. But to start out, he does have kind of an interesting explanation of why his legal first name is Billy. And that's where we'll open into this second act, covering the person behind the legend.
My granddad was William Arthur Wadsworth. And for whatever reason, they never called him William, they called him Billy. And when I came into existence, my dad said, no, if you're going to call him Billy, you're going to name him Billy. And so I was Billy. And then, of course, if you go down south, you have all kinds of Billys, Billy Bob, Billy Joe, Billy Jack. But not so common up here.
Now that we've heard where the Billy name comes from and how it's kind of a family name, it's time to delve into Bill's childhood.
So, I grew up in a little farming community in Iowa. For the first, about 6 or 7 years of life in a little agricultural community. And then I went to a one-room country school, very first thing, and learned the basics. We didn't have kindergarten, you just started with first grade. And I think in my one-room country school, the maximum we ever had was about 12 students. But tremendous education, because you recited in front of this whole building, and so the first graders heard what the first graders recited, second graders heard the first graders, third graders heard it all the way down through 8th grade, and man, you knew it. And you had mathematics, algebra, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. And at that time, you had penmanship courses. You had to be able to write so people could read it. And you did, and you wrote in script writing, not in cursive. Well, now what? It's cursive blocks, or script is regular penmanship, right? Anyhow, that's how you wrote didn't do block printing except when you first started school, and then all the rest of the years it was that. And at the end of 8th grade, you graduated and went to high school, and that was how we progressed. And then my family, my mother got pregnant, and we got off the farm in 1938, and I went to town school, and that was a big switch from 12 people in the 8th grade to about 25 in my classroom. Big difference. And then I went through school there in Iowa from elementary, and at that time elementary was up through 5th grade, 6th grade, then 7th grade and 8th grade. You started junior high, and that was a separate division. And then after that, you went to high school for 4 years.
Now, hearing about Bill's childhood, let's kind of move into talking about some of his family. Now, there's one particular family member that he did not speak about during our interview, and that is his sister Wilma Wadsworth. Wilma and him, as I later figured out through documents that were lended to me, they had a very close relationship. Upon Bill's graduation, Wilma made an entire scrapbook, including a bunch of little artifacts from Bill's time in high school. And I found also just several letters of them just exchanging life updates and all that kind of stuff. They had a good relationship, and one that was important. And that is something that I wanted to make sure that was mentioned, even if it wasn't included in any of the interview information. Because I do feel like it's pertinent to understanding Cowboy and understanding him as a person. Anyway, as I was saying before, he spoke to me more about his family, and that's what we'll hear about now.
Well, I have one daughter that, Catherine Lee Wadsworth Kitten, and she was about 5 years old and decided her name was Kitten. Kitten is my nickname. Okay, fine. Well, I had her, now she's 74, I think. And she's in Murfreesboro, Alabama. And then my next wife was here in town. Well, no, she was from California, and from her I had Kitten, now Nancy Dawn, and then her brother Bill, and he's a Billy, and then they have 3 children, and that's my family. But my 2 sisters, brothers-in-law, and about all my cousins are all dead. So I'm kind of a remnant, if you will.
Now that we've heard about Cowboy's childhood, I want to go back to the interview I did with Nancy, where she's going to share with us some thoughts that she has on her dad.
My dad is so unique, and I have rarely met a friend who has a dad as unique as mine, but the fact of him has always made me different in places that I've been. He raised us for a while in Orange County, California, in Newport Beach, a place that's full of wealth and privilege. And we were always like, I always felt like we were I didn't have the word for it then, but we were the working class family on the in the neighborhood, where my dad drove this old van. It was full of carpenter equipment, and he was always working construction jobs. And my friends' parents were like lawyers and businessmen and doctors and things like that. We didn't have as much materially, but I had this character in my dad, and he had a lot of personality. He always charmed our friends, but he could also be brooding and very strict, and strong-willed, strong-headed, but also quite emotional. He has a lot of emotional depth. He is very much, if you like put any stock in astrology, he's a Scorpio, and the Scorpios have intense emotional profiles, and he does as well. But just this guy who wore cowboy boots and belt buckles and bolo ties and cowboy hats in Newport Beach, California. No one dressed like that. And he dressed to the nines, and he was always there, dropping us. Mostly we walked to and from school, but he was always there for all the things. And he made me different, but that also gave me a lot of courage and willingness to be different. And the older I've grown, the more I've come to really respect and appreciate what the man has accomplished in terms of, not in terms of any professional accomplishments, though he's done, great things or good things, but just his sheer resilience and endurance and his willingness to totally and fully be in the world with so much aliveness all the way up to 96. There's nothing about my dad that has let go yet. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that he never stops working, and work is being of service for him. So, yeah, those are some things to say about that. I'm going to pause and reflect on something else I wanted to share. I also almost never knew anyone else whose dad was their primary parent. And he was our primary parent from the time my parents officially finished a series of trials and divorced, and that was when I was 9, until I was 16. So I lived with my dad for about 7 years. And then I went and moved with my mom to spend some time with her. I had wanted to stay with my dad mainly because I didn't want to move locations again, and we had gone to 3 different elementary schools as my parents were going through a custody battle. But I just didn't know anyone else who had a dad who was in charge of things, and he was a really dedicated father for the years that he had custody of us. Yeah. Cowboy dropped me off to college in 1986 with my then roommate, Julia. He drove us all the way from Southern California up to Santa Cruz, where I was going to college. And for the next couple of decades, he was not very available as a parent. He was excited for me to be in college, and I saw him during my college years, but after college, as I went out into the world, he was, I think, really sad. I think it was sad that his kids had grown up, and he worked a lot of jobs. He had the freedom then to leave and be wherever as we were coming into young adulthood. And so he worked in Hawaii for several years. He worked in the Marshall Islands at some point, or he was in the Marshall Islands at some point, which I barely know where that is, but it's deep in the Pacific. He worked in Las Vegas. He worked in Colorado and Utah. And I actually had to make a request of him that he be in more regular touch with us, because a lot of times I didn't know where he was, and this is before cell phones, and so I was sort of at the mercy of when he wanted to communicate. And financially, he helped, he contributed to our college degrees along with my mom. He contributed his 50%. But he was very adamant that we be financially independent from him. And so I, aside from one time where a series of things went wrong for me in 1993 when I went out to New York for grad school, and he gave me some money to cover some of what happened, he has never supported me financially, and he has always been doing his own thing. And so him finally getting a cell phone was a great thing, because he was much easier to get a hold of. He did, though. He did make a more concerted effort to be in more regular touch with us. But there was a period of kind of mutual estrangement between us in my 20s and 30s until I moved back to the Rocky Mountain area in 2004. And then I began more intentionally building the relationship fascia with him, kind of rebuilding a connection with him. And that's been a beautiful thing. And also, there are a lot of ways that we don't exactly mesh, and it can be challenging. It can be challenging to be in worlds with him that feel sometimes like the polar opposite of the polarity of my own culture, my own worldview, and not my values, but things like that can be hard between us. And so we actually had a moratorium on, I requested a moratorium on talk of politics or religion after September 11th, when I realized that we really saw things very differently. And I was worried that if we talked about those things, even though those things are my specialties as a college professor, religion, culture, and politics, that it would damage our relationship. So we're only now beginning, as I'm interviewing him for my own reasons, beginning to wade back into that stuff.
And then I'd like to jump back to the college stuff a little bit. Would you say of course you've done a lot of schooling, you've done a lot of,
PhD.
yeah. Would you say the way that he raised you was would you say that he's a part of the reason why you pursued that level of education and pursued the career?
Yeah, I think he is part of it. When we were young, we thought my dad just seemed to have all the answers about how the world worked. We would ask him about stars and planets and this thing and that thing, and I think he helped make us both curious. I think we are seekers of knowledge, or I certainly am. My brother went in a somewhat different path, but he also got a college degree, in part because of him. And he definitely valued education, and he almost got a PhD himself. There was a hitch in some of the coursework that they wanted him to do in order to pursue a PhD. They wanted him to get a whole other set of degrees, and he didn't want to spend more time and money on schooling. But he does have a master's, and he does have almost a PhD in psychology, and I do think that influenced me. And I know he was proud of me when I got a PhD. And I do attribute some of that to him. Certainly the determination and work ethic part, because you really have to work hard to earn your PhD and to write a dissertation and then to become a scholar and do all the disciplined work that takes. And certainly I'm influenced by him in that. And also, Cowboy never made me feel like I couldn't study whatever I wanted as a girl or a woman. He always supported me in my intellectual interests, my writing talents, my reading, things like that. And I never felt that he saw the world differently for me because I was female. There are other ways that gender values between us come into some conflict, but in that way I always felt that he supported me as a young woman, at least in terms of his beliefs and values, and never got in my way, and was always proud of me for what I accomplished.
Now, something that Nancy is doing, as she is a professor at the University of Denver specializing in political science, she is currently in the process of writing a book about of her own personal political differences between her and Bill. And she shared some very interesting information about her dad's kind of political position and approach to politics that I feel is very pertinent to Bill's character. And you'll now hear about that.
So Daddy is, we've always called him Daddy. Daddy is very proud to be an American, and as a vet, as a child that grew up in a pretty poor family, of farmers who ended up becoming middle class over time. As someone who values his independence and who values industry and loyalty and patriotism and so forth, he's proud to be an American. I think it's become harder for him over the decades to understand, I think, some of the changes in the country. Some are related to immigration, some are related to race, some are related to, modernity and, the phones we use and the tech we use, and he's never been a man who's used a computer. So he fundamentally doesn't really understand that world. He doesn't really understand that his phone is a computer and that it's connected to the internet and that that's in his phone. I try to explain this to him and it's hard. Not because he's stupid at all. He's very intelligent and he texts, as you know, and he uses his phone for all these things. But I would say that I have heard him say a lot of negative things about sort of strangers or immigrants or this group or that group, just casually sometimes throwing out epithets and, about people he doesn't relate to. But I've never seen him in person demonstrate prejudice toward a person. Like if he actually meets a person in a category of difference, he really meets them there and learns something from them. I've never seen him be hostile to a real human being, but I have seen him be hostile sort of abstractly in categories. And I think that's also a product of the communities he's plugged into and the messages he gets from those communities. But one-on-one, my dad's always been admirably not just tolerant, but interested in people, all kinds of different people. And I never see real prejudice in his heart when we're talking about face-to-face interactions. And I think that's a really admirable thing about him.
So, kind of delving into how he is when he is meeting people, would you kind of agree with the statement that, like, when you're talking to him, he almost makes you feel like the most important person in the world in that very moment?
Yeah, I think he's really good at connecting with people in the moment and demonstrating enthusiastic interest and kind of receptivity to knowing what they're up to. I noticed that he's observing a lot more about people than I sometimes would give him credit for. Yeah. And he's good at getting a read on people, I think, and making people feel special, which is why he's a great greeter. He was a greeter at Walmart for a while, but actually he ended up, is that true? He was a greeter? I think he was briefly a greeter and he moved immediately into inventory at Walmart, which was quite a thing for someone in their late 80s to be doing, stocking shelves. But he has a gift of connection with people that make people want to share about themselves and be around him, for sure.
Cowboy was also a man of faith. Nancy also touches on this subject. And a little fun fact that I want to include before we go back to the interview with her is that Cowboy owned, like an old school, I don't remember the exact year on it, Ford Ranchero. And the plates in this Ranchero said Cahoon or Kahoo, or I'm not exact on the pronunciation. It's spelled Kahu, and that is actually Hawaiian for to God, really illustrating Bill's dedication to faith. And Nancy, here in a moment, will delve deeper into his entrance to a faith in God.
So my parents went through a difficult separation and custody battle. That's a complicated story. Both of them are really good people. Both of them are really great parents. But they went through a 3-year custody battle that I believe involved 2 different court cases, and it was a highly stressful time for everyone and involved a lot of driving between Mammoth Lakes in the High Sierra and Los Angeles area. And around that time, at the beginning of their separation, is the first time I remember my dad going to church and bringing us to church. And he got involved with a small evangelical church outside of Mammoth Lakes, California, and became really religious. And in some ways, to me, it was overnight, because I never remember my parents talking about religion or God or anything until then. And that became a very important part of his life. He became involved in the Calvary Chapel movement, which was a movement in the 1970s that expanded born-again Christianity a lot on the West Coast. And we went to the first church in that sort of enterprise of evangelicalism. And it was run by this pastor named Chuck Smith. He would baptize people at the beach, and they had kind of modern music and all of that. And I think that my dad's immersion in religion, though it didn't, for me, it only partly resonated. It resonated for me for a while, religion. But I think that got me interested in religion, and is the reason that I studied religion and politics for my PhD. And I worked on a book about evangelicals and racial healing. And I've learned a ton about American evangelicalism, I think partly in order to understand my dad. Because his religion, I would say, pulled him from the middle of our political spectrum much further to the right. I think he was always conservative in a certain cultural way, but his parents hadn't been very religious. His mom had gone to a simple Presbyterian small-town church. But in the 1980s, as evangelicalism was blowing up and the Christian right really began to ascend in our national politics, he became a lot more conservative. And over the decades, from my perspective, he's become more siloed in particular worlds of very conservative communities, and religion is part of that. At the same time, there's a part of my dad that I think you can dialogue with him about religion or spirituality, because he does remain curious, even though he's quite fundamentalist in his views. And I think his existing values informed his draw to the church, but I think the church also magnified his conservatism. And it's a source of, I really admire his dedication to religion. And his religion has sometimes been, I think, a bit of a wedge between us, because it's made certain subjects really difficult to talk about. And it's just not always been an easy area for us to bridge. But I certainly admire his faith and his dedication to God. And he, for a long time, I don't know if you know, that his brand was CMK, and it was on his driver's license. And CMK means Christ my King. And on his Peach Ranchero, he has another driver's license that essentially means to God in Hawaiian. So he wears belt buckles often with some religious message on it, like he is Lord, and he's involved in the Fellowship of Christian Cowboys. And I think being dedicated to God is a huge part of his identity.
At this point, we've learned about both Cowboy, the legend, and Bill, the man. And like I mentioned at the start of all of this, is that all of you learned this information in kind of the same order that I did. I started out by getting to know the legend of Cowboy, and then I got to know who he is as a person later on. And when all the interviews were said and done, I sat down and really just took a good think about all the information that I had just received. And initially I was thinking about how amazing of a life Cowboy has lived as a whole. Like, extraordinary accomplishments, like the picture in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and like his work with the Academy of Country Music. All of it's amazing. The world travel that he's been to, all the things that he's gone to see. it's brilliant. It really, really is. And I kind of thought to myself, it was like, I want to have those kind of experiences. I want to know those kind of people. I want to be able to live my life in that kind of extraordinary fashion. And then I kind of took a step back. I toned down my starstruckness that has that fallen upon me again. And I thought about Bill the man, a man who had made mistakes with family and many other things in life that may have not been touched in this documentary. But specifically with the family, is that we, being in the future and getting to have these stories, and as all point of history, is to learn from the mistakes of the past. And I think there is a lot to learn from the story of Bill. And I think there's a lot of goals and ambitions that can come from the story of Cowboy. And when you combine those two things together, that to me sounds like an amazing life to live, to have those extraordinary experiences and know those amazing people and see those amazing things, but also not to make the same mistakes that he did make. That at that point, I had realized that's what I want from my life. And as really a young individual, that's meant a lot to me. It gave me a sense of direction to start to work towards. And I am on that path. I think, I hope. That's what I'm aiming for. But what I also want to encourage you, the viewer, and what has become almost the entire point of this documentary is to say, don't just settle for an average life, unless if that's what you want. Go out, live like Cowboy, talk to people, meet people, make connections, go out there, do extraordinary things, have extraordinary experiences, and also learn from the mistakes that he made. So, because in my eyes, that is a life very, very well lived, and one that I would feel incredibly blessed to have, and one that I'm actively trying to seek out for myself. And like I said, I encourage you to do the same if that sounds appealing to you. If the lifestyle of the legend appeals to you, and the value of learning from others' mistakes appeals to you, then you have something to take from this documentary. You have the same thing that I took from this entire process. And again, I encourage you to go out and live like that. Because, again, just what a way to live. And I know I'm being redundant here, but I really, really want to drive that point home and how passionate I am about that feeling. Over this past year, and over my time interviewing Cowboy and getting to know him and interacting with him outside of the documentary, I really have come to love the man as almost a family mentor or a family member, as a mentor, as someone who I admire, but also a friend. And this documentary, it's to immortalize his story, immortalize who he is, because he's an extraordinary person. But again, it's to show that you could live like him. Something that didn't get mentioned before was that Cowboy was born in a kitchen sink in a small town in Iowa, on a farm, right before the Great Depression. He did not come from noble beginnings. He did not come from a place of power. He did not come from a place of wealth. He didn't have those connections from birth. He made them all. He made those connections and lived a life like that. Why can't I? Why can't you? Because it truly shows that it does not matter where you come from. You can do extraordinary things and you can live an extraordinary life. And he is a beautifully elegant example of that. And that is the other point of this documentary. Like I said, is to show you and show myself that there is an extraordinary life like that to live. And that you and I can live a life like that. You don't have to be born or come from a place already having those connections. You can be born in a kitchen sink on a small farm in Iowa to a poor family and come that far. To live a life well lived. Cowboy, during the time of the production of this, he passed away during the summer of 2024 at the age of 96. So if you care about longevity, maybe there's a part of his lifestyle that led to him living to the age of 96. That is astonishingly long time. So if you care about that, maybe that's another reason to live like Cowboy. But to him too, even through all of his experiences, it was a life well lived to him as well. And there's one line that I've saved from the interviews for this point, for this end, for this last bit. And I think it really does show a life well lived.
It's been an exciting charisma, I should say. Got to see a lot of stuff that I never ever dreamed I'd get to see. I thought, good night, a country boy out here on the farm, and here I am in how to manage. But it was good. And, oh,